Hello, you beautiful people. We are back after a brief break from making any videos, but today I want to talk about some very popular players and sort of talk about whether I think they are buy low players or whether you should avoid trading for them. So I'm going to talk about 5 of the most popular players that are being mentioned in trades right now. I'm going to go ahead and give you my opinion on what you should do with them, what I would do if they're not on your team, if they're on your team, etc. And then just sort of give you my reasoning as to why I think these things. But yeah, hopefully this will be very helpful to a lot of you because I assume these are guys that a lot of you will have on your fantasy teams, and I think just getting some advice on them should be pretty helpful to the majority of you. So I'm hoping that'll be the case. But anyway, before we begin, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to join the Discord through the link in the description as well. If you have any fantasy questions, NBA, just want to talk NBA shit, or just anything really, it's a great place to do that. Really awesome community in there. I think we got like 1,100 people right now, so definitely consider joining that. And without further ado, let's get right into the video. Alright, so these are all going to be some pretty controversial players at the moment, and who else is more controversial than Russell Westbrook? And this is a tough one, man. Russell Westbrook is someone who I had ranked pretty decently high coming into the season. You ever had him ranked in like the 20s? Do I think he's going to maintain that? That is the question I'm going to try to answer right now. And off bat, I initially want to say I don't know if he's going to finish in the 20s, but I don't think he falls below 40. Like, I think he's pretty much a guaranteed top 40 player just because of his usage rate, how much he can contribute across the statistical categories in the points league. Like, he really just fills up the box score. He's pretty much like made for fantasy in that regard. The only problem is like that we're all aware of shitty shot selection, the turnovers, man, averaging like 4.5 turnovers a game. It's just ridiculous. He tries to do so much on the court. Like, he just gives it his all every single night. He just he's a little bit out of control here and there. Just tries to force things, and it just really translates to some poor fantasy value. But overall, I do consider him a buy low player. And just hear me out before, you get mad in the comments or anything. Just hear my reasoning, and then if you want to get mad, go ahead, drop a comment, let me know why you disagree. But last 7 days, he's averaging 27.7 fantasy points per game. Last 15, he's averaging around 35. And on the season, he's only averaging around 37 fantasy points per game. And that has been being like pretty dragged down recently because of all of the poor performances we've been seeing. But I don't know. I still think that Westbrook is going to sort of recover from this. I think a lot of people just like to slander Russell Westbrook, and like I get it. It's pretty funny. Like, he does do some pretty fucking stupid things on the court sometimes. I can't lie. Like, we all like watching those montages where he just makes stupid pass after stupid. Like, it's just ridiculous. But you got to look past the bad side with Russ sometimes and sort of just appreciate what he provides on the basketball court, like outside of these bad moments, because he is just such a dynamic player and he provides value all across the board. I mean, nightly triple-double threat. On the season, he's averaging around 19, 8, and 8. And it's not too far out of line with, like, his career numbers. The only thing that's down is his scoring. And I do expect him to sort of come around, and at the very least, I want to say average around, like, maybe 40 fantasy points per game. That might be a stretch. That might be a hot take. I don't know if a lot of people are going to agree with me, but I just don't see any way that Russell Westbrook doesn't sort of bounce back, at least from his recent value, which is, like, around 30 fantasy points per game, like I mentioned, around 35. So I do expect him to continue to see an increase in his production and get around 40 fantasy points per game. Who knows? Maybe a lot of you won't agree. AD is returning or anything, but I just think I don't think the Lakers can trade him. I don't think there's a trade market for him in the NBA. I think they're just going to have to stick with him. It would just be too much of a shock if they just sort of mixed up what they were planning for the whole year in like the middle of the season at the trade deadline. But yeah, I do consider Russell Westbrook a buy low. And if we go ahead and look at some recent trades involving him in the Yahoo fantasy basketball trade market, you'll sort of see what I mean. So he was traded in a 1-for-1 for Gordon Hayward. If you can get Russell Westbrook for Gordon Hayward, I take that deal like 10 times out of 10 any day of the week. He was traded for Damian Lillard. If you can get anything for Damian Lillard, bro, like I talked about him. Some people were giving me shit when I said like I wouldn't trade for him and I wouldn't rank him inside my top 50. I hope you guys are seeing this now. This is why, man. Like, he might be shut down for the entire season, which is just crazy. You really hate to see it, but I mean, this was the risk all year. I didn't know about it when I made my initial rankings, but now that we've seen it, I just avoid Dame at all costs. I'm just going to keep saying it in every video in case there's anyone new watching. He was traded for, anyway, back to Russell Westbrook. He was traded for Klay Thompson. I would much prefer to have Russ. He was traded for Shea. That one is a bit closer. I think Shea and Russell Westbrook is probably a pretty even trade. Personally, I think I would take Westbrook, but I know that's definitely not a popular opinion. I'm just scarred from taking any Thunder players after last year's shutdown because I had Shea on my team at the time, and I was just like, are you serious, bro? Like, it pained me, and I just like what Westbrook provides on the fantasy basketball front more than Shea. He was traded 1-for-1 for Cole Anthony. Again, I'm taking Westbrook any day of the week over him. And then Kevin Love and Scotty Barnes for Westbrook. I still think I would take Westbrook over the two of them. I've explained why in previous videos involving Scotty Barnes as well. I know Scotty Barnes' value is pretty similar to Westbrook's, but I just would prefer Westbrook over the two of them. But yeah, I hope that gives you guys an idea of where Russell Westbrook's trade value is sort of at right now. And just given all of these trades that we're seeing on the recent trade market, that's just why I think he's a buy low player, because if you can get him for any of those deals that I mentioned or like something in similar value, I do think that's a great trade for you. And I think that's why there have been so many trades involving Russell Westbrook, because I think people are starting to like become aware of the fact that they're like, yeah, I think I'm going to take the chance that he is going to bounce back. We've seen it before with Russell Westbrook. Like, he just has such shitty stretches, but then after All-Star break last year, he went on like an absolutely ridiculous stretch and ended up like finishing with the second most total amount of fantasy points like in the entire league last year. So he was like the second best fantasy player in the league, which is just crazy to say. But yeah, I don't think he's going to finish top 10 or second or anything nuts like that this year. Just the usage isn't there with LeBron and AD, especially with LeBron going Super Saiyan. But yeah, I do think Westbrook does continue to trend upwards, and I definitely consider him a buy low player right now. If you disagree, this is probably one of the most controversial ones. Let me know in the comments. We can talk about it. This is a long explanation, but I mean, it's Russell Westbrook, and there's just a lot to talk about. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get into my next player. All right, next up, we got the stereotypical Boston Celtics fan talking about Jayson Tatum. He's another player that I do still consider him to be a buy low option. His fantasy points per game have slowly been trending upwards since the beginning of the season. We all know he had a rocky start, but since then his efficiency has started to pick up, but he still has had a few inconsistent performances here and there. And especially of late, if we look at like his last 7 days, he's only averaging around 37.5 fantasy points per game, and then last 15, again, 37.5. And while that might not seem incredibly low, I think for Tatum, by the end of the season, I do have him finishing around averaging 45 fantasy points per game. I still am confident that his like production is going to continue to trend upwards. And I don't know why this is the case with Tatum, but he always seems to sort of figure things out during the second half of the season. And maybe I'm just an optimistic Celtics fan that just can't accept reality, which is definitely a strong possibility. But all bias aside, I do still view him as a very high fantasy asset. Like, I think I'm very high on Jayson Tatum. I think it's a great opportunity to buy low on him whenever he goes on like a bit of a poor stretch, because while he does put up consistent numbers, he is just a bit of a streaky player in terms of his like efficiency from the field. And if we look at the recent trade market for him, there haven't been like too many crazy trades for him right now. I mean, there was a trade, most of them seem pretty even, or they're just people being dumbasses just messing up their leagues. But one trade that I think is interesting is he was traded for Jared Allen, and I think I would definitely trade Jared Allen for Jayson Tatum if that gives you an idea of where I think his value could be at. Like, if you could pull that trade off, I think that's very solid for you. And then other ones is he was traded for Luka and LaMelo, and I don't even think that's a buy low. Like, I think in that case you probably lost the trade, honestly, if you're like giving away like Ball or Luka for him, excuse me. And then another interesting one here is he was traded in a 1-for-1 for Anthony Davis. I think I would prefer to have Tatum at this point. I know per game Anthony Davis does put up much better numbers, and like the Lakers are going to need his production when he's back into the lineup now because they've been struggling. But I don't know, man. It's just Anthony Street Clothes Davis, man. Are we comfortable with him missing that much time? They said he's going to be reevaluated in 4 weeks, so that should be in this next week or so. We'll get some more news, hopefully. But even then, it's not guaranteed he's going to be back. And I think I would just prefer to have Tatum's like all-around steady production, even with the inconsistencies here and there. I do still have him probably finishing inside the top 15 in terms of total fantasy points at the end of the year. I'm not wavering in that as of yet. So I definitely think this is a great time to buy low on Jayson Tatum. And yeah, let's just go ahead and talk about the next player. Damn, so we talking about Westbrook and Julius Randle in the same video? Man, I told y'all we were talking about some controversial players here. Julius Randle, this is a tough one. I genuinely am so confused with his production this season. I knew that last year's production was a bit too much for him because he did finish inside the top 10 in terms of total fantasy points. And I didn't think that was sustainable just because like a lot of his offense depends on taking very tough shots, and he was hitting at such an elite percentage. I wasn't sure how maintainable it was. I know he did it for an entire season, but it looks like he just sort of finessed everybody. He shot like 40% from three. That's been like one of the biggest differences from his production from last season to this season. But it's mainly his scoring numbers and his efficiency that's just been dragging his overall fantasy value down, and it's been dragging the Knicks down as well, which you just hate to see. I mean, it's fun watching the Knicks in the playoffs, man. I don't know if they're going to be able to keep it up if Julius Randle keeps playing like shit. But yeah, do I consider him a buy low? At this point in the season, this is probably the one I've sort of wavered on the most in terms of my opinion on him. I still ranked him in my updated rankings inside the top 25 in terms of total fantasy points. I just thought like he plays like 36 minutes per game on the season, and I don't know if I'm comfortable placing him there anymore. If we just look at his overall production, it's the scoring numbers are just, that's what's hurting him. It's the efficiency, and I don't really see it like catapulting that higher than where it is right now. Like, if he has a good scoring game, he's going to put up very solid fantasy numbers because he averages around 10 rebounds per game and like 5 assists. So you're getting those numbers pretty much guaranteed. And it's just pretty much you're just betting on him having a good scoring night every night. And if he doesn't, he's giving you like 13 fantasy points like he did yesterday against the Spurs. And then if he has a good shooting night, he's giving you 56 like he did against Indiana. So it's just that inconsistency is really tough to tell with Randle. And like overall, he's just been sort of like all over the place. And that's just giving me cause to like pause on where I'm ranking him. And currently, I just don't know if you can say he's a buy low, because I think we've sort of seen what we're going to get out of him. I think just that mixture of having really solid games mixed with like the very low performances just make it impossible for me to rank him inside my top 25 anymore at this point in the season. Like I can't really justify it. He's just been too consistently mid for me to put him here. And yeah, I mean, he is going to have stretches where he's going to put up like some production that we saw last season when he was averaging like 44 fantasy points per game. So he's probably had like one of the hardest drop-offs that we've seen. I mean, he's pretty much down like 10 fantasy points per game this season. Or I should say 8, we'll give him some justice. But yeah, if I'm looking at guys who I would trade for Julius Randle, don't get me wrong, I don't have him like falling out of the top 40. I think at the end of the season, he is probably going to average around like 37 to 38 fantasy points per game, which isn't terrible, but it's just not what we were all expecting coming into the season. Right now, he's down at around 35. So I guess technically, I'm still considering him a bit of a buy low, but again, it's not by much. Like maybe we'll see a 2 fantasy points per game increase by the end of the season, but I don't have a lot of confidence in that. So if we look at some recent trades involving him, one that I probably still would make is I would trade John Collins for him. It seems to be one I've seen quite a few times. I think that's a decent trade. Another trade that I would probably consider is if you could trade like maybe a DeAndre Ayton. I think that would be a good deal if you could trade DeAndre Ayton for him. And it's not like a complete ripoff, because I mean they'll probably be pretty equivalent in value. I mean, it's not averaging too many more fantasy points per game than Julius Randle is right now, but I do think long term I do prefer Julius Randle in that sort of situation. But yeah, that's just something to consider. I don't know if I can just justify the sort of trades that I have been advertising in the past, because I've been assuming his fantasy value is going to go up to like the 40 fantasy points per game range, which is like the elite level players. I do still think just because of sheer minutes played, he definitely still finishes inside the top 35, but I'm no longer confident placing him inside my top 20. So do I consider him a buy low? Not really, unless you can get him for some of the players I mentioned. But yeah, there's just been a few recent trades, like people trading like Miles Bridges or like Jimmy Butler for him and stuff like that. I just can't with any confidence do that anymore, in my opinion. Like I just couldn't really justify that. In my leagues, I probably wouldn't take those deals. And even guys like Drew, like guys I ranked closer to him that I had below him, like I wouldn't trade Bradley Beal, Anthony Edwards, Brandon Ingram, Jaylen Brown. I wouldn't trade any of those for Julius Randle right now. So yeah, definitely probably someone I would just avoid, honestly. Like I wouldn't really give him that much, because you're going to have to give like roughly equivalent value, but it's just not really going to be worth it with all these inconsistencies. I'd let someone else have the problems. I don't really consider him too much of a buy low player. I gave you some options, like I mentioned, John Collins, DeAndre Ayton, why not? But yeah, overall, probably not a buy low, more likely on the avoid side for Julius Randle at the time being. And who knows, maybe he goes on a hot stretch, goes back to like prime Julius Randle of last season when he was averaging 44 fantasy points per game. But at this current moment in time, I'm comfortable with what I've said here in this video, and I don't really see that changing for the time being. Alright, now we move on to Darren Fox. And if you're new to the channel, this is someone that I ranked way too high coming into the season. It seems like Tyrese Halliburton is sort of taking the role that I thought Fox would fill. Was not anticipating this at all, but nevertheless, we're going to talk about De'Aaron right now. Do I consider him to be a buy low player? I still do, and hear me out, alright? So he finally started showing some like flashes of the production that I was sort of expecting from him this season. He had a 4-game stretch where he finally put up like consistently 40 fantasy points per game. I mean, he had 30 points 3 nights in a row, and then he had 24-point night against Miami. And it was sort of looking like he was starting to figure things out. He was looking a lot more comfortable in these games. And then news came out that he had like a shoulder injury or something. And I don't think it's a serious issue or anything. Otherwise, there would have been like more reports about it. I think it's just a minor thing. And he had it before his game with Portland. Then he put up 17 fantasy points. Then he put up 24 against Cleveland. And I do think that if we can sort of see the production we were getting from him when he was on that 4-game stretch, it did look like he was more comfortable. He has sort of had more consistent production than we've seen from him throughout this season. And I think just with these recent 2 games, I'm comfortable chalking at least one of them up to the nagging shoulder injury. It'll probably dissipate pretty soon. I don't think it's too serious of an issue like I already mentioned. And yeah, like I have for the majority of the season, I'm still going to consider De'Aaron Fox a buy low player for right now. On the season, he's averaging around 33.5 fantasy points per game. I think he probably finishes around 37. I might be, who knows, maybe you guys will disagree with me. I think bare minimum is 37 fantasy points per game for Fox. I still have not given up complete hope in him as of yet. And the main reason I consider him a buy low is just looking at the recent trades involving him. He was traded for Mike Conley and Duncan Robinson. I mean, I'm taking Fox any day of the week there. He was traded for Lonzo. I'm still taking Fox over Lonzo at this point in the season. He was traded for Chris Middleton. That one's a bit closer, but I do honestly still prefer to have Darren Fox on my team. That one, some people might not agree with me, but I would think I would rather just have Darren Fox for right now. I think his production is going to increase, like I mentioned. And I do think Middleton is on a bit of a hot stretch right now. Don't get me wrong, he was also probably a buy low player, but his value has been pretty high as of lately, so that's why he's not in this video. But yeah, I would still try to buy low on Fox. I know there's a lot of noise about Tyrese Halliburton being the better player and like they should trade De'Aaron Fox. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but it's the Kings front office, which is probably one of the most difficult front offices to predict what they're going to do in a season. They're notorious for not making good decisions in anything, and I don't really like to try to predict what the trade deadline is going to look like or like what trades are going to happen, because every season we all just end up looking like clowns because nobody really knows outside of like the team's sources and Woj. So I'm not going to try to predict that like for sure 100% De'Aaron Fox is going to move, because in reality we just have no idea. But yeah, for a guy that was averaging 25 plus points per game last season, to see him fall to 20, or he was below 20 for the majority of the season, he was around 18, but he started to creep his way back up. He's averaging around 21 points per game right now. And yeah, I just have seen enough over him for these last 4 games for me to still not lose hope in him. I'm still going to consider him a buy low player, and I hope some of the recent trades that I mentioned involving him help you guys out in terms of targeting him. So yeah, definitely try to buy low on De'Aaron Fox while you can, and I'm pretty confident that he will start to see an uptick in his production soon. Alright, so the last player on my list isn't as big of a buy low as everyone else that I've already mentioned, but I do still feel like it's worth mentioning, and it's going to be Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine's just been one of my favorite players to watch in the league this year, man. Unrelated, but yeah, if we look at his recent production, I mean, his last 4 games have been pretty lackluster for his standards. He hasn't cracked 35 fantasy points per game in this stretch. And if we look at the production, I mean, it's clear why. His scoring's just been a bit down, his efficiency's been down. And overall, I mean, we're looking at one of the most consistent scorers in the league for the past year. Like, I don't really see his production just all of a sudden falling off a cliff. There's no reason for it. It's just been some poor shooting nights. He's still putting up his 27 points per game in 2 of the games. But like I mentioned, just not putting up too much in the peripheral stats. He had 0 assists, and then he had 3 assists. And I mean, on the season, I'm not saying like he's a high assist guy or anything, but he does generally put up some pretty efficient scoring numbers, and the assists are just like supplementary. So yeah, if you take those away, and if you take away like the efficiency that he typically has, you're just going to get some poor performances. Obviously, I don't even know why I'm saying this. I'm tired. Leave me alone. But yeah, overall, I do still consider him a buy low player for now. It's probably not as like easy as a sell as everyone else on the list, but I do still think anytime you can get a very solid, like reliable performer like LaVine, it is worth doing. I do think he's going to average 40 fantasy points per game on the season. I think he is finally going to like break into that elite club of players that average 40 points per game. 40 fantasy points per game, I should say. But yeah, last 7 days he's averaging 26, and the last 15 he's averaging 36. So not too big of an increase to expect, but I think if you can get a guy that's going to give you 40 fantasy points per game 40 fantasy points every night, I think that's an opportunity you got to take. And if we look at some recent trades involving him, there haven't been too many 1-for-1s. He's being included in a lot of trades as like a secondary piece. So yeah, take that for what you will. It doesn't really give you too much to go on, so I can't really give you guys any like trades for like his specific value right now. It's one of those situations where you sort of just have to ask around your league, talk to the managers that have Zach LaVine, throw a few offers their way, try to lowball him a little bit. I mean, their production has been low. The only 1-for-1 I've seen here is for Nikola Vucevic, which is just pretty stupid. Like, I would definitely take LaVine over Vucevic right now. He's just been more reliable throughout this season, and I trust his production a little bit more. But yeah, overall, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Apologies for the break. I haven't posted in like 10 days or whatever. Just was taking a nice, little chill break, doing my thing. But now we back. Going to try to get some more videos out this week. So stay tuned for those. Thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, I hope you all have a great rest of your day.